It's difficult enough for parents when you say, Mom, Dad, I've become a Muslim. You don't want to do the thing where you turn up on the doorstep with the headscarf on going, right, where's my halal meat? Get rid of all this alcohol in the house. You don't want to do that. You have to approach it with a certain amount of tact.
When I got off the plane from Iran, I was the only woman under 60 wearing hijab. I just didn't feel comfortable taking the scarf off. And that was really hard, going through Heathrow with the scarf on, thinking, I don't know what's going on, I'm not making this choice.
I thought the hard part would be the research, and then I'd be a Muslim and we could get on with life. And actually, I felt that I've had to fight all the time to be afforded the basic credibility, politeness, respect, which I feel was afforded to me my entire life and which I took for granted.
3 women, all white and living in Britain, aged between 26 and 44, but otherwise from different backgrounds. But they have one thing in common. They embraced Islam after becoming curious following the atrocities of 9/11. I'm Miriam O'Reilly, and in this edition of Heart and Soul from the BBC World Service, I'm going to hear their stories and find out what drew them to the religion that was used as a badge by the 9/11 perpetrators, a religion that has exposed them to public hostility, opposition from their families, and in the eyes of their non-Muslim sisters, a way of life which subjugates and oppresses women.
In 2001, we estimate that there were about 60,000 converts. That figure may now have risen as high as 100,000.
Kevin Bryce is a researcher at the University of Wales who's been studying converts, and by tracking census figures, he's found a significant increase in the number of white women turning to Islam.
Pre-2001, it was just over 50%. Whereas post-2001 it's approaching 70%. So it does seem that over time, and certainly in the last 10 years, that there's been significantly more women than men who are converting to Islam.
What is the appeal for white women?
There's an indication that there's a dissatisfaction with, in inverted commas, Western life, that the place of women, the role of women in modern society is not offering the answers that people are looking for, and so they're turning to, say, Islam as offering an alternative.
The view of Islam is one of a repressive religion where women are subjugated.
Yes, and irrespective of how correct that view is, it is a widely held view. And so for people who don't have an understanding, to take that first step to start to want to have an understanding does still need to be explained.
Maybe we're more inquisitive, or maybe women, in the way that I did, felt from a feminist perspective that we needed to understand why this faith was oppressing women, and then actually looked into it and thought, well, actually, the problems are a bit more complicated than the faith oppressing women. And actually, this faith is very interesting. I want to know more.
On the 11th of September 2001, Miriam Francoise Serra, daughter of a French father and an Irish mother, was studying at Cambridge University. She'd been an actor since the age of 10, having played the young Margaret Dashwood in the film Sense and Sensibility, alongside Hollywood stars Kate Winslet and Emma Thompson. On the day the Twin Towers came down, her perception of Islam changed.
The repercussions of September the 11th were felt acutely on campus, as they were across the world, really. There was a very latent tension, and one could feel that suddenly people were being seen as Muslims, whereas before they may not have been identified as any different to anybody else. And that bothered me, and that made me want to learn a little bit more.
Did it never jar with your feelings as a feminist, the way women are treated within Islam, or appear to be?
Certainly, my feminist crusade against my Muslim friends began on that premise, which was that this religion is terrible, it mistreats its women and all the rest of it. But actually, it was then that the more I sort of learnt about things, the more I realised you can't blame third world culture, in other words, economic poverty, unemployment, political dictatorships. You know, you start being able to distinguish the faith from the other circumstances, the other issues that are holding women back from being fully emancipated.
One of the best-known converts to Islam in Britain is Lauren Booth, sister-in-law to the former Prime Minister Tony Blair.
The more you ask people, the more you'll find that 9/11 was a real trigger in the world, not just for an awakening of a kind of right-wing seeking for another enemy post-Cold War. It was actually an awakening for people who wondered, there's the Twin Towers, there are these planes hitting, who is Bush going to smash? Who is he going to make the enemy? And when you saw it was Islam and it was Muslims and it was some of the poorest regions in the world, many people, aside from myself, thought, well, what is this about? Have they just been hiding amongst us with their evil beards and rocket-hiding turbans and their mutilated women? How come we've never noticed them before?
It was on Lauren's subsequent visits to Gaza and the West Bank that she began to feel an emotional pull towards Islam, which became stronger in 2008 when she knocked on a door in the Rafah refugee camp.
And the woman who opened it said to me, Salamu alaikum, Fadal, peace be upon you, welcome. With a smile of such sweetness and openness, it was as if she was inviting me into the Taj Mahal. Not a slum when you go into one room and there are 16 filthy mattresses lining the walls. And I was angry. I said to this woman, your Allah doesn't care about you. Look at the way you live. And I said, so why do you fast in Ramadan when life in Gaza is so hard? And she looked at me with such gentleness and she said, sister, we fast to remember the poor. And something in my heart unlocked and a very clear thought came into my head, and it was, if this is Islam, I want it. If this level of contentment with nothing, if this belief in the goodness for others when you have less than nothing, if this openness and trust is Islam, please let me be a part of it.
I'm following a stream of hundreds of people who are crossing a field here in the middle of Lincoln on a beautiful summer's day. We're gathering for Jummah, Friday prayers, and this is the Living Islam Festival, which has been organised by the Islamic Society of Britain. And about 4,000 people are here to praise Allah and to promote peace and harmony.
In order to be ritually clean for prayer, you wash your hands, your face, your arms, you wipe over the head and you wash your feet, so that when you go to pray, you're clean.
We've come to the Living Islam Festival in Lincoln in northern England to meet Fataha Imman. Fataha means the opening after the first chapter of the Quran. It's not the name her parents gave her. It's the one she chose in order to make a clear statement of her new identity when she converted to Islam. Fataha was brought up as a Catholic in a white middle-class home in a small coastal town in the south of England. It was while she was studying in the very multicultural city of Leicester and sharing a house with Muslim friends that she picked up a book called The Islamist by Ed Hussein, a British Muslim who's had first-hand experience of radical Islam.
He was talking about people getting sucked into extremism. And because I was living with Muslims at the time, I was able to talk to them about it. And I was able to have them say, look, this isn't the be-all and end-all of our religion. This is just a tiny part of how some people interpret it.
Don't you think it's interesting, though, that the thing that sparked your interest was reading about a terror group?
I suppose it is, in a way. It is a little bit strange. But I've heard a lot of people, leaders of mosques and so on, have said that post 9/11 and post 7/7, there's been a rush of people interested in Islam because suddenly everybody's talking about this religion and everybody's saying it's this, it's that, it's the violence. And so there's lots of people that are saying, is this true? And trying to find the answers, trying to read up about it and see what it's like. And I mean, post 9/11, I didn't necessarily rush straight away to look at those things. But this was a book that was available to me. And the unexpected consequence was I actually discovered more about the religion, and that's, I think, happened for a lot of people, that trying to get to the root of why everybody's saying it's such a violent religion has led them to actually understand the more normal side of it, which is the most common side of it, which is the side of people are living every day. And then obviously I was living with Muslims and I was talking to Muslims and they were my friends, and being surrounded by them, it showed me the side of Islam that you don't see when you're reading the news, because the news is all about the bad guys and something exploded or somebody got shot or whatever. The reality that I was living was so completely different to that. It forced me to acknowledge that part of it is just minute, the tiny sort of little fringe mad people at the edge who want to do crazy stuff. But that most people are just normal and living their normal lives. They want to be friends, they want to make you dinner, they want to sit and chat. And that's the reality, very normal, very peaceful.
What was the moment, though, when you decided you wanted to convert?
I'd been raised with this idea of God as this kind of human-esque figure, and I'd never grasped that, because I was always thinking God must be bigger than that. If you walk across the park and if you look at the sky and you can see some divinity, you can see something beautiful there. And Islam has the idea that God is as close to you as your jugular vein, so in your neck. He's so intertwined with the creation, is so involved in it, that you don't need to send prayers up to heaven, you just need to whisper. That got me thinking. Islam was describing my God back to me. So I've just finished praying, I've just come from the field. They always pray separately, and I think some people get a bit affronted by the way that everything is always so separated out. But actually, there's something strangely freeing about it. When you're surrounded by members of the opposite sex, there's often a lot of pressure to maybe look a certain way and act a certain way. I certainly felt that growing up. I find it much easier to be myself when there's only women around. It increases the spiritual aspect of it because those distractions are removed and it's just about you and God, and I think that's a beautiful part of the prayer.
The realisation that she wanted to convert came to Fataha during a lecture on Islam. The speaker was so inspirational, she left her seat and asked to make the declaration of faith, the Shahada, there and then. But conversion for Miriam Francois Serra was a lengthy intellectual process, which involved exploring and analysing several versions of the Quran.
I ended up coming to a conclusion about the Quran, which I hadn't expected, but which to me was then, as we say in French, incontournable, there was no way around it. And so for me, it was just then a question of saying, well, am I now going to be intellectually coherent and abide by the outcome of my findings in the way that I've done in every single other area of my life? Or am I going to actually say, that's not really my bag? It sounds right, but I can't really do it.
Some people are reached by the intellectual route and they examine the Quran and they see that there's science in the Quran. Some people are more practical and they like the practices of Islam. Other people are hearts and souls, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reach them and go, feel this. This is what it's all about.